So now that we have focused on also the tools, and I have shared here the sort of few really beneficial tutorials from Adobe's own sort of resources. Those are best when you are learning the sort of interface of the program and the basic functions. So we'll use the same process of that. If you are learning the tool and have no prior sort of knowledge of the software, then first proceed with these 8 of sort of getting to know the interface, changing image sizes, know to work how the layers work in Photoshop. Also adjusting the image quality and making these selections are these sort of tools that we then get to almost every time that you use the program, you need these tools. But then also we get to the sort of task specific things. But as the Illustrator or PowerPoint, when you are making the whole sort of customer path or system visualization or this persona, those are the sort of core that when you collect all the things. So for the photo editing, I'm showing you few of these really useful ways of editing, specific if you take your own images. The first part is how to sort of enhance your own photos. And then the second part will be, if you use the stock photos, we can also rearrange them and edit them to fit our needs. So the first part will be more on basic sort of things that really help the quality of your images. And I'm using few example images here that are from a photo editing book, and also images that I have taken myself. And they are here in the plan for the photos. There's a folder for the photos that I'm going to use now in these examples. There's not many, but there's few. So normally learning anything is that if you see an example and then you want to try it out yourself, then your image might not even have the same sort of difficulties or same things that you need to edit. So I'm sharing these files so that you can sort of follow these videos and try out with exactly the same image. So that helps immensely when you are trying to figure out how the tool works. And after you have sort of tried it with your own sort of with the example image, then you can also try your own images and a complete different stock images. So this hopefully is helpful, and this is something that I have found really beneficial when you sort of share the actual same file that you see in the example. So you all can even almost copy the amount of something from the screen and try out like if it looks better or worse. But the basic image editing task that we almost always need to do is that we adjust the sort of color balance of the image. And here's an example from a sort of book that teaches you about photo editing. And there's this lady shopping for sneakers in the image. The images are quite small as I have reduced the size, so these won't sort of be 8K resolution huge files. But we see like what's the trouble in this image, and then I'll show you how to sort of adjust the color dynamics of this image. So the image has been taken in a shopping mall, and it's in a shady side of the sort of area, and we can see that the sunshine has been quite bright, and all the sort of sky windows are already almost sort of blown out to a white tone, so we don't see the blue sky. Or if we would see the blue sky in the windows, then we won't see the actual sort of content from the shadows at all. But this is specific if you take not with a sort of any extra lighting and you take a photo, we get this sort of almost a little bit dull tone for the skin colors. and we get this sort of grayish tint on the image. So I'll show you one way of adjusting and also sort of examining the photos, sort of where the darkest part of the photo is and where's the lightest parts. And then we're gonna use the Photoshop editing tools. I'll take the grid away because I think that might be distracting while you see the video. So one way of doing like color dynamic adjustment is from the adjustment tools. And here the second tool from the top is called levels, that controls the sort of end points, the black and white point of the image. And it also shows this sort of graphical histogram display of where the image textures are located. So the black end is here on the left, and the widest, brightest spot is here on the right. And if I adjust these sliders, the image will go completely sort of ruined. Like if I push it all the way, the white point, so it'll sort of adjust the white point to the point that there's no content left in the area. Or if I push down the black point, it'll sort of darken the image completely. And this is a good thing to sort of know, that adjusting any of these color amounts is that once you reach the sort of black color that is in a value of 0, 0, 0, so there's no color at all in the pixel that has stored the information, or if the color is in this sort of 255 on every 3 color channels, then it will be completely white. So after those levels, there's no extra black or extra white. So if you, in any case, push something to the point that every pixel in the image is completely white, then it loses the information from the file. And this is why normally the digital cameras, they leave not this much that the example has. This has quite sort of broad, but they normally leave a sort of not completely dark pixels and not completely white pixels in the images. And in the editing phase, you can then sort of even take the full extent of the color sort of scale, but the camera is trying to sort of save. It has this sort of maximum limit that it will allow how dark the pixel will be. Of course, if you take an image in a completely dark room or take an image of a sunshine on a snow, then you'll get mostly white or black pixels, but even on those, they won't go to the maximum amount. It's saving the dynamic to be edited later, so they have a sort of automatic limiter on specific camera models, have different ones, but you can study if you're using your own. But the idea is then is to sort of refine and get this color dynamics on the so that the blackest part of the image will also be black and not just dark gray, and same that the widest part of the image will be white and not just sort of light gray. So we are pushing the limits. It's, my comparison has always been that it's same as if you have berries, you have picked them from the sort of berry bushes or from the forest, and then you squeeze the juice out of the berries. So you have to sort of pressurize them and get the sort of full 100% juice out of them. And then after that, you sort of need to add maybe a little bit of water to it. So our process is quite similar. But on Photoshop, you can also examine with the sliders, like where is the darkest part in the image. And I'll sort of make this slowly and also try to explain at the same time. So this is one that if you have access to the program, you can then try out yourself. But while making sort of adjustments to the slider, I'll press from the keyboard the alternative Alt button before moving the slider. So then I'll get this sort of almost like a heat map of the image. And if I move the slider around, I can see that the areas that will now be sort of bluish and then they will turn to black, they are sort of like almost like a heat vision, that those are the darkest parts of this image. So if I sort of don't move anything for a while, you can see that the jacket pocket and the collar, they have these really dark spots, and also under the arm in the sleeve, there's these like black areas that they are the first ones that will appear when I sort of move the slider slowly. So I can see from this test that the darkest parts are in the sort of jacket pocket or in the collar or the spot right under the arm in the sleeve. Those are hard to sort of see only with your eye. So this, that you use the Alt key and the slider, you can sort of examine where the sort of hot spot is on the image. And you can do the same thing with the widest. So if you take the white end slider, press down the Alt key, and you slowly move the slider, it'll show that the windows will appear in the sort of skylights. And those are that we can already see. But what is the sort of brightest part on the sneakers? So now when I'm slowly moving the slider, keeping the Alt button pressed down, I can see that the heels of the sneakers in the front row are getting this lighter cyan and white spot. So I can examine that the lightest part of these sneakers is that the light is hitting from the right to these areas on the sneakers. And I'll do this again so you can focus only on these two heels. So if I move the slider, you can see that the black areas, they will get first this blue, then the cyan, and then the lightest part. So this sneaker here has the sort of lightest part of all of these sneakers. So once I know this, that the black spot is nicely in the pocket and the white spot is on the heel of this blue tinted sneaker, then I can use these sort of color eyedropper tools to set these points, and then the program will adjust so that the pocket will be the darkest part. I'll take this set the black point eyedropper, and I will the tip of the eyedropper, like you would be taking a dose of oil or any liquid sample. I'll click on the pocket, and then I'll take the white point and I'll click it on the heel of the sneaker where the lightest part was. And immediately our eyes sort of adjust to the settings. So I can sort of preview what's happening here. So now it sets so that the jacket is almost completely black, because now the blackest part is also then set to the pocket, and the heels are getting this white color here, but now they are on the most extreme levels of this whiteness. The windows look almost completely the same because we don't have this extra white. They won't go over this level, so we can just ignore the lights and they will be almost white in the background. And then we get the sort of almost always the hardest part of any image editing, is that we get the sort of midpoint images, the gray image. And there's the sort of middle eyedropper on this levels tool that functions as a picker for this neutral color. And the term neutral color is that once every color channel has the same amount, they will be a tint of gray. So I try to find a grayish color from the image, and here's a nice sort of mosaic tiles in this column here. So I can click around here and I can see that if I click in any specific gray area in the image, it'll be tinting more to the sort of red, or it'll be looking more neutral. And if I click on a bluish tint, it'll go and it looks almost like an Instagram filter. But if I try to find this neutral color, then once I have this sort of that the focus of the photo, the person, that they look sort of healthy and their sort of tones, skin tones are nicely portrayed, and I can stop at that point. And again, our eyes quickly sort of lose memory of what we just saw. So on the tool, there's a possibility to preview these changes. So I can sort of toggle them on and off, and we can see the differences that this dynamic adjustment has made. So from this almost grayish bluish tint, we have now moved to the point that the person looks more healthy and the image look a bit warmer, and the whites are now brighter and the black point is now almost like too dark. But now this is the time of when we have crushed all the juice out of the sort of fruit or berries. So now we need to lighten up and lift a bit the levels by adding sort of imaginary water to our sort of condensed juice. So the input levels, these are now sort of squishing the content to be this maximum dynamic. There's no empty spaces anymore on the bar graph. So after this, we can lift the black point, and by slowly lifting the black point up, we need to stop once we see almost a similar amount of texture in the jacket once we sort of preview the changes. So at first, the jacket has much more, sort of you can see the folds here on the original photos, but after the compression, it goes a bit one-dimensional. So if I lift the black point to around 30, I get to see the folds in the jacket. And on the widest part, if you sort of slide few values off from the maximum, you won't even notice the difference. But it won't go to complete white, but it'll have this sort of lightest possible gray tint on the white spots. So if you just sort of cut a few values away from the maximum white. And now we get this sort of like before and after, and we can see like the bluish tint, the folds on the jacket. After the adjustment, it'll move to seeing the similar information, but the colors are more warm and the photo looks more neutral, or sort of that it doesn't have a bluish tint on the content. And if I'm happy with the changes, then I can apply them. And you can also in Photoshop use an adjustment layer to do this, so you don't even have to do it, the adjustments nowadays, to your actual image, but to just show the how it's done, it's better to adjust the actual image. And if I now sort of zoom in even more on the image, and if I go back this one step, so this is like before the adjustment, and this is after the adjustment. So this dynamic that we get the mid-tones corrected, the neutral tones, the white points, then we have this better quality of the image that didn't have so good lighting when we were sort of taking the photo. So these are normally the most common editing tasks, And you can even do these similar things even with your mobile devices. There's the sort of contrast and black point adjustments even on the photo editing that you can do on your sort of device. But especially that I enjoy is that you can sort of examine the photo and really sort of see where the black areas are and where the lightest parts of the image are. That sort of tool are mostly not available in sort of everyday photo applications. So this is one benefit of using a professional sort of software to do the image editing. And this is the sort of most common thing, the color dynamic. It affects sort of the whole of the image. And I have two more examples of these sort of end points. And the first one is an image that has sort of the idea that we want to adjust it so that the image will be looking as it's on a completely white background. And this is from an actual photo shoot for a cafe. They photographed the products and I was there to help them. So I have saved the images that are not sort of like pre-editing. So we get to sort of practice on the same images, and you can also use the same photo trying yourself. So to explain about the situation is that the different products, there was sort of like chocolate cakes and these cheesecakes and all sorts of different products. So the chocolate cakes has this trouble of being really dark, and the cheesecakes has this trouble of being really light. And if you use sort of flashlight and lighting in the photo shoot, you regularly get these sort of like small drops of water or the small sort of reflections from the food that will go to completely sort of white. So this image has been taken so that the exposure level is set to sort of underexpose the photo. And our eyes are sort of really powerful optic mechanisms. And once we see the photo, we get this idea that, hey, the plate is white, but the plate is not in any sort of close to the actual sort of whitest color possible. So to adjust the background to be completely white, I can make the sort of reference color. So if I take a huge brush and I will now paint a sort of white reference color to our photo, and I won't go near the sort of cake, but we don't want to adjust a wooden table to be completely white, then we'll lose also the cake. So here we see that now that we have a comparison, we have the widest possible color that was made with a sort of color picker here, and then with a brush tool I painted the color around the photo. So now we have a sort of reference of what we are trying to adjust. So now we clearly see that, okay, the plate is not in any way white, but it's almost like medium gray. So again, the adjustment tools, and now as we have underexposed or sort of set the exposure to sort of minus sort of EV, so we can choose the same exposure adjustment in Photoshop and then increase the exposure of the photo with the same values that we have used on the camera to sort of underexpose it. And this is always nicer if we would be in a sort of workshop environment, but we also would be now maybe finally getting everyone to open their softwares and logging into the computers. So as we have so little time, hopefully you can get to try out this by yourself. But this is the sort of fun part. Once I start to slowly add more exposure to the photo, and I have made this reference white color, Now I can just sort of slowly move up right where the sort of white plate disappears to the white color. If I keep going, even the cake will disappear. So this is why we need the reference color. If we wouldn't have the white color here, how to sort of see the differences, we could easily sort of overexposure, because then we don't have the set limit. But now once the sort of plate disappears, then we can stop the adjustment right at that point. And you can even, if you want to sort of fine tune something, you can highlight the value, and then with the arrow keys, you can sort of like click 1/10 of a increment every time. And right when the sort of white plate vanishes and the colors match, then stop at that point. And one good thing is to sort of little tilt your head and see if the monitor is giving this sort of shadow image. It can even leave a shadow underneath if you have different monitor settings, but that's making it too difficult. And then finally, you can sort of adjust the sort of black point if you want to sort of have the darker colors on the shadows. And the gamma correction is the mid-tone, so you get to sort of, if the red is going too light, you can sort of push a little bit on the mid-level, so this would be going all the way dark. This would be losing the content, so the adjustments are always really small. Normally don't need to adjust it from, it's almost like going from freezing 0 to sort of boiling water, so the sliders go way more than you need to adjust. But here again, we get to see the sort of preview of before this exposure setting and after, and we get to compare that there's the same information and there's no white spots on the product. And once we are happy, then we have the sort of only the product photo, and if we are building a sort of mood board out of this, then we can also add different things around it, and it'll look like it's on a empty space. But this way, doing it, you get also these nice shadows that are from the actual sort of lighting that was in the photo shoot, so it won't look that it's been cut out, and you even have these sort of like small crumbs, so it always looks a bit more realistic if you don't just erase the background, but you just sort of take the photo on top of a white element and then adjust the colors. But if the white end is the sort of extreme level of brightness, then the second sort of environment that is quite difficult for cameras is the dark and shadows. So the third example is taken here in Aura river bank. There's a sort of night evening time when the sun is setting on the background and the lights are giving nice reflections on the river, and the lightings on the sort of boat gets this nice sort of contrast. But as the cameras, they tend to sort of save the content, and then on the editing phase we can then fix certain areas, and this is one of the really powerful tools in Photoshop. The shadows and highlights adjustment tool. We can then divide the photo to these different sort of levels and adjust the areas sort of independently but at the same time. And on the adjustment levels, these levels and exposure, these were the sort of first tools in the menu, and those are the most used. These are the most common fixes that we need to do. But then here at the bottom end, we have a tool that is named shadows and highlights. And this tool is why I'm delaying opening it. It already, once I open it, it will make an adjustment straight after I open it. So if I click the shadow and highlights tool, it'll already make this 35% sort of boost to the shadow areas. So even that I have not yet adjusted anything, I can sort of preview the changes, and we can see how the texture on the riverbank, these stones, and how the sort of different areas in the water, they get this sort of more visible boost by sort of lifting the shadows and the content inside that color area. So even just opening the tool benefits the image, and that's always a nice thing, that you don't even have to do anything other than now just click OK and you'd have a better image. But to sort of see what's possible, then we can even get almost this sort of daytime, nighttime dynamic, that if I raise the shadow amount to the 100% value, then it looks almost like a daytime. So going from nothing to full, you get to see where you would have most benefit of lifting the sort of image shadow levels. The highlights in this image, they only kind of affect the really brightest spots. So it's not so visible even with the 100% changes. Only the sort of front end of this boat gets, and the area in the sky, they get this sort of small adjustment even with the 100% level. But the shadows in this image has this huge benefit of adjusting and optimizing the content. And as I've been using this tool before, I already had this more options. You saw me sort of zipping down the window, but there's even more areas to control. And it gets really this, that if I sort of boost the shadows and get the content here, the saturation of the colors are not so high in the shadowed areas. So here you can also adjust the midtones of the image, and you can sort of adjust the contrast, and also you can boost the color levels. So if I want to make a completely sort of fantasy image of the riverbank, if I boost the saturation, I can really get the sort of orange and purple texture of the sunset and all these colors. Even the window that has these blue colors and they are reflecting on the water, you can see clearly how much they show if I sort of play around with the slider from the desaturated to this maximum sort of saturation. You get this almost like artwork looking like there would be some creative lighting engineer at work. And again, adjusting, like if you boost the shadows, and if we compare to the original image, this is like a completely different, non-natural looking image, but these sort of high dynamic range images are also kind of grab our attention because it looks unnatural. So we get this sort of, oh, like that looks so colorful and so sort of filled with different sort of levels, and you can sort of study the small reflections and they look all quite nice. Even though that the image had the content, you can optimize by adjusting the levels, and overdoing it might be fun, But even the sort of just adding the sort of around 40% boost on the shadows, it gets you this stone texture, gets these sort of small things that are then visible for the viewer, and this doesn't look so dark and sort of gloomy, the riverbank area, but it looks more of that there's actual apartments and people sort of living in the apartments. But this is why it's a creative profession. So you get to also make these fantasy images, and on the sky you really get these blue, purple, orange textures boosted if you play around with the color settings. And always before sort of applying anything, make a sort of before, after, and if you feel that okay, this is going to the right way, then finalize the decision. But if you get this feeling that okay, I have now completely ruined the image, then you can cancel and start all over, or make a backup copy and revert to the original. The shadows and highlights is one of the tools that are not part of these adjustment layers, but I think in future updates, hopefully it's going to be, because this is sort of non-destructive way of editing an image. But now we made the changes to the image. So on the history panel, we can sort of see before and after. And if we would be like, okay, not satisfied, you can just revert to the original thing and then open up the tool and do it again and start from the sort of level that you feel benefits your photo and your need.